Hello, this is Dr. Kyle Allison. Thank you for joining me for this week's video lecture. This week we're going to discuss the topics of business and culture and world economies. Both topics are going to speak in volumes about how culture influences business and how cultural values and norms differ from region to region of the world, and when businesses need to do global expansion or enter foreign markets, they need to consider the culture they're going into and the impacts of that culture on their business. And then we'll discuss the topic of world economies, which really is how we compare countries against one another in financial perspective, such as gross domestic product, uh, per capita, and also overall wealth of the nation. So let's get into the first part of this lecture, culture and business. In general, society and individuals have multiple cultural identities, and this is important for any business expanding globally is to understand that most individuals across the world do identify themselves in similar ways. While the cultures could have differences, the ways in which people identify themselves culturally could be very similar. People identify themselves based on their culture of their nationality, their religion, ethnic group, generation, social class, and their workplace or corporate culture. To discuss each of these in some detail, nationality, obviously where someone is from, or where they at least identify themselves to be from or have an affinity to. Religion, what religion they believe in, and what religion values and customs do they practice that are part of their culture. Ethnic group. Generation is also one where we can talk about different generations and age groups and those demographics and how that participates in a local cultural perspective. Social class, so where a individual or a group of people fit into the realm of their economic value and levels of society. And obviously workplace and corporate culture. What is a culture of a workplace and how does that impact when you expand globally? Let's take a look at organizational culture in more detail. The textbook definition is that organizational culture is a set of beliefs, values, norms put together with symbols like dramatized events and personalities that represents the unique character of the organization and provides the context for action in it and by it. Really what this means is that an organizational culture is a set of values that the company believes in as part of their overall company mission and what type of business they're in, the beliefs of that company and how they frame their workplace to have others believe in their mission, and overall what the company adheres to work towards, their overall mission and value and goals are what actions are taking place for that company and individuals to work towards within that organizational culture. The chart below that also identifies various ways organizational culture is developed. It's the overall environment and atmosphere. What is the sense of the workplace? What type of an environment do you work in? Is it an open environment where people are agile who can work together and express their opinions? Is it a very top-down hierarchical culture where only the very few top leaders make decisions and others just execute those decisions? Is it an environment of fun and some say laid back atmosphere where there's not as many rules and policies? Is it a very strict environment where the culture is very they enforce a lot of policy and it's very formalized? That is one way to think about organizational culture. Compensation. Is your company known for paying its employees well or not well? Does your company advocate for equal pay or does it pay based on merit and performance? Standards and policies, we talked about that. It's part of the environment, but does the culture of your organization have a lot of policies and strict policies and standards, or are they pretty open to a very laid back environment that don't have that many policies and standards, just enough to be legal and get by? What really is at the core of an organization obviously is its people. Do the people fit the organizational culture that the organization is striving towards? Do the people basically fit in to the company mission and values that the company has broadcasted? The leadership. A lot of what any organizational culture is being viewed upon is how the leaders of the organization lead the company and basically adopt and advocate for those cultural beliefs and norms and values, plus the mission of the company. And the overall organization, all those components combined, we just discussed, is what makes up an organization and influences the overall culture of that company. Many people, including yourself, may make a decision on where to work based on the company culture. It could be the right job, it could be the right place to work, but at the end of the day, or the right compensation, but at the end of the day, will you fit in? Will you get along with your peers? Do you believe in the company mission and their values and beliefs? Can you make this a long-term career for you if you fit into the culture? At times, individuals clash with corporate culture and therefore aren't able to make it a sustainable career. As you read in the textbook, and also one of the key topics is understanding cultural value dimensions across the world. A psychologist by the name of Gert Hofstede developed several different value dimensions and ways in which to identify different cultural values. And through various studies, we are able to bucket some countries based on their cultural value dimensions as per the theories developed by Gert Hofstede. Four we're going to look at in this PowerPoint, but there are more in the textbook. But four key ones I want to make sure you're aware of are individualism, collectivism, low power distance, and higher power distance. Let's look at each one of these in more detail. Individualism is a culture in which people define themselves as individuals and form looser ties with their groups. More of an autonomy. Individualism is a type of culture where individuals have a right to their choices and have individual rights, that aren't being conformed, and they're not, people have a right to divide define their own path in their careers or in their lives. And some of these countries adopt that, such as the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Hungary. Collectivism is defined as cultures where people have stronger bonds to their groups, and group membership forms a person's self-identity. So therefore, the collectivism, or conforming to a group as part of an identity. It's being a part of a community, a part of a group that one's own identity is defined. Some of those countries that identify this way are Guatemala, Ecuador, Indonesia, Pakistan, and China. Now on the lower left side there, let's talk about lower power distance versus high power distance. A lower power distance is a society that views an unequal distribution of power as a relatively unacceptable, whereas high power distance is a society that views an unequal distribution of power as relatively acceptable. Let's break each of these down. Lower power distance is that basically they don't see certain members of society or an organization being able to have certain levels of power. It's not acceptable for the upper echelon, the elite, to have all the power, and others in the lower class or the lower grade of a position in a company have less decision-making power. They want more equality in that power. They want there to be a little less of a gap between the top decision makers and the people who just either make some decisions or just adhere to those decisions. But some countries do adopt that the higher power, the elite, the top executives in a company for that matter, have the right to make the top decisions, and everybody else just has to follow suit. But there's a very narrow group of individuals that make the decisions for that culture. A couple examples of lower power distance are countries such as Austria and Denmark, whereas high power distance is Malaysia and Slovakia. So that is kind of the overview of cultural value dimensions, and there are more in the textbook I want you to read. But at its core, let's talk about what a culture can consist of. So as you take these core elements of culture, then you can then relay that into business culture, how culture in general in society can impact business. Culture consists of many things. It consists of manner, or how someone presents themselves, or a reputation of a society in which people act and behave. A mindset, how people believe in things or what people believe in. It's a shared culture of beliefs and values. Values, obviously, too. What do we find important in our culture? What do we believe in that is going to be of worthiness to our culture? Things of that nature. Rituals are a part of culture. What are some things that we do on a regular basis that we celebrate, or we do as a rite of passage, or that we do um, as a cultural norm to things that are a part of who we are? Religious beliefs, that's pretty straightforward. What religion do I believe in and practice is a big part of culture. Some cultures, like the United States, have many different religions, whereas some countries have very few or one religion they believe in, and that's what makes up that culture for that society. The laws in any country definitely impact a culture, whether written or one unwritten. There are definitely laws that are written, but there's obviously some laws of culture that are just not written, but are just known. You just know not to do certain things or have the ability to do certain things in some countries. The arts, music, movies, art in general, all those things that impact a culture. Art is a way to define what cultures believe in and how they perceive themselves through the art that they portray. Ideas, what are the ideas and beliefs that we talked about before? And the customs as well. What customs do I have? What are those general things that make my culture unique? Ceremonies is very important too. What types of celebrations and ceremonies do I have via, is it a wedding ceremony versus a birthday ceremony, religious ceremony, or just in general, what types of things do I celebrate as part of my culture? Social institutions, that's that group. What group do I affiliate with in my culture? Could it be a social class thing? Higher class, lower class? Is it a particular interest or hobby? It could be all types of social institutions, and that's what you as a group adhere to. Myths and legends. Every culture may have a myth or legend behind them. Certain countries are known to have certain historical stories about them that make up and define who they are. There's some bias in that, but there's also some truth in that too. That these myths or legends are what define a certain part of the world or region or country. Individual identity, we talked about that before. In some cultures, we embrace individualism, like the United States, where everybody has an equal opportunity to make their own path, create their own destiny, that kind of thing. And overall behavior. Behavior is what we perceive of others. And as you exhibit your behavior, that is how your culture can be identified and portrayed. So there are many viewpoints on how culture impacts business today. One recent article and in-depth study took place in 2016 and is still relevant today. It was conducted by Deloitte. And what they did is they interviewed many leaders in business and to find in a qualitative study what were the common themes and ideas when it came to how culture impacts business in today's very fast-moving and complex business environment. According to Deloitte, culture has become one of the most important business topics of 2016 and beyond. CEOs and HR leaders now recognize that culture drives people's behaviors, innovation, and customer service. In their study, 82% of the survey respondents believe that culture is a potential competitive advantage. Knowing that leadership behavior and a reward systems directly impact organizational performance, customer service, employee engagement, and retention, leading companies are using data and behavioral information to manage and influence their culture. What that means is that CEOs, leaders of companies, are generally looking at how culture can impact their business. The right culture in a company can put a vast competitive advantage in the market. If there's a strong organizational culture, the performance of their employees is better, customer service is top notch, employees are engaged and staying with their company, and overall, a successful and top notch organizational culture just leads to a successful business environment. It makes for a healthy business environment. It makes people want to work there. Customers can resonate with that with quality products and services. And that is one key thing the companies are making sure that they have some companies are making sure they have a quality work environment with a true culture that's being perceived in the market. Culture is a business issue, not merely an HR issue. The CEO and executive team should take responsibility for an organizational culture, with HR supporting that responsibility through measurement, process, and infrastructure. This is very interesting. Wherever I work in my career, a lot of the time, individuals believe that HR or human resources, because they are human resources, is responsible overall for the shaping of an organizational culture. Well, quite frankly, it's those in the business, those who exhibit the day in and day out and are the face of the company, which is generally the leaders of the business, are the ones that are going to really influence the organizational culture. They're the one leading the teams. They're the one managing the teams. They're the one hiring the individuals to join the company to make sure they fit the organizational culture. And they're the ones who set the visions, the missions, and the values. So therefore, it really is on the business team, the business leaders, to establish and execute that organizational culture. HR is a component of that to really measure its success, to make sure that employees are engaged, that employees are getting the resources and help they need to be successful in the organization. But it truly is the business leadership that defines and exhibits the organizational culture. More insight from that study from Deloitte stated that while culture is widely viewed as important, it is largely not well understood. Many organizations find it difficult to measure and even more difficult to manage. Only 28% of that survey and the respondents of that survey believe they understand their culture well, while only 19% believe they have the right culture. What this means, like I just said, is that individuals perceive organizational culture as being led by HR, because HR is the one to, generally be the one to work on employee issues and relations. It doesn't mean that HR is the one that defines or exhibits a business culture. The organizational culture is again defined by business leadership and practice, and others view business leaders to, showcase that culture. Which this means in this survey is that a lot of organizations need to educate their employees and educate themselves on who truly owns the culture. And if 19% of this survey means approximately 20% of businesses and individuals believe they have the right culture, there's a lot of improvement that needs to take place in organizations across the world to ensure that people understand who's in charge of the organizational culture, but that they have the right organizational culture. The second bullet point, culture can determine success or failure during times of change. Mergers and acquisitions during a large growth phase and product life cycles can either succeed or fail depending on the alignment of culture within the business direction. Therefore, in times of change, that is so important. I've seen this in my career where if we're going to merge with another company, and I've been through a couple of those, change management at its core is how one company merges with another. How do those two organizational cultures, collide? Sometimes mergers are acquired because of the fact the larger corporation buying the smaller corporation, or one company buying another, believes in that corporate culture, and they think they have a similar corporate culture. Why are you going to take the employees of company A and the employees of company B, who may have similar corporate culture identification, and bring them together into one corporate culture? That is challenging, and if it's not done right, it can fail. But it can succeed if it's done right, and that's through consistent communication. That's through the support of HR, but really at the end of the day, like I said, that really relies on those strategic business leaders to adopt but also lead that organizational culture. The Deloitte study also tried to find a way to define what culture means in the essence of business today. They define it as culture describes the way things work around here. Specifically, it includes the values, beliefs, behaviors, artifacts, and reward systems that influence people's behavior on a day-to-day basis. It is driven by top leadership and becomes deeply embedded in the company through a myriad of processes, reward systems, and behaviors. Cultures include all the behaviors that may or may not improve business performance. Today, culture is a CEO level issue and something that can be measured and improved to drive strategy. So just as we discussed in this lecture so far that it's a top-down approach, business culture is definitely CEO level, and it's at the very top level all the way down that culture needs to be instilled based on the beliefs, the values the company upholds, the behaviors instilled, and the reward systems in which the company rewards their employees, and the praise and the recognition that they give their employees also generates the culture around the organization. So that is what we do to define culture. The other word, though, is engagement. Engagement is actually not what culture is, and culture embodies all the things we discussed in that first definition. Engagement is the action of communicating throughout the organization and developing ways to get that culture instilled in the organization. As the Deloitte study states, engagement, in contrast, describes how people feel about the way things work around here. It is a way of describing employees' level of commitment to the company and their work. According to our model, which was in the study by Deloitte, engagement encompasses 5 broad areas: meaningful work and jobs, management practices and behaviors, the work environment, opportunities for development and growth, and trust in leadership. When engagement is poor, employees feel uneasy or uncommitted, resulting in high turnover, low performance, and low levels of innovation and customer service. New tools are enabling companies to monitor engagement on a detailed, real-time basis, delivering specific, actionable information to continuously improve the work environment. So again, culture is what's around you. Culture is what is instilled from the top level down throughout the company, and what is being practiced and portrayed in the behavior of employees. But it's up to the employees to embrace that culture. Are they engaged with it? Are they innovative, and do they find meaning in their work? A lot of employees find that part of what they're looking for is a good work-life balance or an opportunity for advancement. And if they're not getting what they feel like they want out of their company culture, their engagement can be low, therefore not putting their best productivity into their jobs, and also increasing a high turnover rate for some companies, as employees are looking for a culture that they can thrive in. So it's very important for a business culture to be established in a way that also allows for success within employees. So as we stated, engagement and culture are connected. When a company's culture is clearly aligned with business strategy, it attracts people who feel comfortable in it, which in turn should produce a high level of engagement. Conversely, programs to improve engagement often discover cultural issues, forcing the company and its leadership to question and change its values, incentives, programs, and structure. Both culture and engagement require CEO level commitment, as we have been stating, and strong support from HR to understand, measure, and improve. So it's interesting as you look at how employees are engaged and how they are portraying their behavior day to day. Are they happy with where they work? Are they showcasing their desire to put their best effort into their jobs? If it's a poor performance and a poor atmosphere, that goes into the viewpoint of the culture. So they are hand in hand, and this is even today a major concern for some companies that have high turnover, is that the culture of their business and their organization is not fully captured, is not fully defined, and is not being exhibited from the top down. One piece of business and culture that we must take into account is ethics, and we'll discuss ethics a lot in this course and do various assignments on ethical dilemmas. But when it comes to business culture, there's several things you need to understand when it comes to global business. To avoid confusion about ethics in global business, it is suggested, based on various research, that businesses take 3 steps to help guarantee their companies and employees behave appropriately and ethically. Again, these are suggested steps based on various amounts of study and not necessarily a required thing that all companies do, as ethics can be subjective and or handled differently by various companies. But in a very general sense, these are some basic global business suggestions and how businesses can ensure employees act and exhibit ethical parameters in their job. First, they can develop a clearly articulated set of core values as the basis for global policies and decision making. Companies must align its decisions with its values. The most shared values are honesty, dignity, responsibility, and respect for others. And when working with other cultures, it is important to recognize difference in values. So, in its essence, most companies, as we know, have a set of general core values and principles into which they instill into their own business or culture. It is very important that when they do business with another company, that they understand that company's value and how those values contribute to their culture to ensure that there's a good, solid match or a way to work together to move forward. If the company values and principles between 2 different companies, especially 2 different companies from different countries or global markets, have fairly vast different values and look at things differently in the business world, it's going to be a lot harder for them to do business together. In a merger acquisition where one company wants to own another, generally that company looking to buy the other company has a sense for the values of the company they're looking to acquire. And therefore, at times, it can be easier to acquire a company that has similar values and principles as that other company. Again, it can be difficult to do business with any global enterprise if the values of the company are not similar or the same. The next key step is it suggested that you must train international employees to ask questions that will help them make business decisions that are both culturally sensitive and flexible within the context of those core values. Companies often have training and policies that teach employees its ethics code or ethical standards. And while formal legal protection may be a necessity for businesses, it's important to consider how these policies are supported by leadership within the organization. Only most successful companies that I've seen do this are ones that fully do the research ahead of time to understand the global business partner they're going to be doing business with and truly understand the values, the ethics, and the culture that they're going to do business with. Therefore, they can take that research and build a training program to train employees in how to conduct themselves in a manner that doesn't offend and works in synergy with the foreign market or business. It's very important, though, that policies and training are very robust, that are not vague. Vague policies for training to work with an international company in any kind of vague instruction or guidance is going to cause potential issues down the road, and at times legal issues. Some foreign market or law that you don't know about, or some value that they hold, it could really find yourselves in some type of trouble, even legal trouble. So it's very important that the research is done correctly and that the training is robust and thorough. The third suggested component to this is that there needs to be a balance, the need for policy with the need for flexibility or imagination. Companies should establish an approach that is flexible but robust, with guiding the employees to exercise responsibility and make a good professional judgment. So while training needs to be robust and all the information needs to be shared, there needs to be some level of flexibility for the employee to engage and do business with the foreign entity. In that, research can only provide so much information in the onset when it comes to learning about a new global business partner. And training is definitely going to help get the basic and core values instilled into that company looking to do business with a foreign entity. However, part of the exploration of doing business with a global business partner is learning as you go. And to learn as you go, you must be flexible in the fact that you may need to augment or evolve the policies and how you partner with that global business partner as you conduct meetings and as you conduct engagement and business practice and just time. You'll learn more about that foreign entity and how to do business with them and find ways that you find mutually exclusive understandings in each culture. So therefore, policy should not be set in stone and have some flexibility to be modified over time, as long as it meets certain successful criteria between both business partners in a global aspect. So that concludes part one of our discussion tonight and lecture when we discuss culture and how it impacts global business. Again, those are just some of the highlights. There's a lot more impacts of culture and how it affects business. And I want to make sure you do read the articles in the textbook and also peruse more of the content this week to really grasp how culture impacts business. But what I provided was some of the key highlights. The second part to this lecture tonight is going to be a brief overview of world economies. And when we discuss world economies, what does that mean? To its core and simplistic way of putting it, it's just the way in which we compare and evaluate countries and their economic state of the union, if you will, when it comes to several different key metrics and financial economic factors. So right here, this is a recent June 2018 overview of the world's biggest economies. These are the top 10, and these were based on data from the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, which is a very credible source that can provide world economies. And there are multiple sources, but they're generally going to be within the same range of dollars. It just depends on how the information is obtained and how the data is sourced. But as you can see in value, when it comes to the country and what they offer as far as monetary value, United States is number one at $20.4 trillion. China at 14 trillion, Japan at 5.1, Germany at 4.2, United Kingdom at just below 3, as well as France, India right there as well at 2.85, Italy at 2.18, Brazil at 2.14, and Canada at 1.8 trillion. So what this kind of gives you is an overview of, the scale into which these economies are for each country. But as you know, each country has their own way of doing international business, and some countries are just basically larger than others. The more the population, the more there's going to be a need for trade and importing and exporting. So the value in which you see is also related to other macroeconomic factors. The United States has the largest economy in the world at 20.4 trillion, according to the data from the IMF, which shows the U.S. economy increased from around 19.4 trillion just last year. So it rose about $1 trillion in the last year since 2017. As we see, China follows with 14 trillion, which is an increase of 2 trillion in 2017. Japan at third place with an economy of 5.1 trillion, up from 4.87 trillion a year previously. So all the top 10, for the most part, most of them have risen in their value over the last year. One topic we also look at in discussing world economies is what's considered developed economies. A developed economy is an economy enjoying sustained economic growth and security. Some of the common characteristics of a developed economy are low birth rate and higher life expectancy, high level of literacy and well-trained workforce, and the export of high value added goods. High gross domestic products is also a common measure of a developed economy. Generally, developed economies are the ones that you don't hear about struggling or have a over poverty stricken scale when it comes to their country. They're developed. They have a good amount of jobs available. They have good education systems, and the average individual is making enough of a living to survive. Now, that can be pretty robust. It can be pretty vague in some instances, though, as well, because even in developed economies or countries, there are going to be pockets of that country that are poor. Some will say United States is a developed economy, and that is true. There is a lot of scale in the economies here in the United States, but we do know in the United States that we have a lot of poverty. We have some percent of the country that isn't wealthy and has issues with their workforce. So we can't think of a developed economy as just a oasis of no issues in their economy. There's still pockets of issues, unemployment rates, things of that nature. But in essence, the vast majority, has an economy that's doing well, and has a good education system behind that to back that up. So in a recent article, many articles out there discuss world economies, and I wanted to bring a more recent viewpoint on world economies from 2018. One article stated that despite recent softening, global economic growth will remain robust at 3.1% in 2018 before slowing gradually over the next 2 years as advanced economy growth decelerates and the recovery in major commodity exporting emerging market and developing economies levels off. So we've seen some growth in the economy basically throughout the world over the last couple of years. As we just saw the last chart, the top four countries or so grew 1 to 2 to $1 trillion or more around there in each country. We've seen a growth. We've seen some growth in the United States as well when it comes to economic value and also better job rates. But at some point there that levels off. It doesn't get down to no unemployment. It doesn't get down to continued $1 trillion growth year over year. There's a point where economists right now, in some articles, now again this is just one viewpoint, are stating that it's gonna level off, and we're gonna not see necessarily a major decline, but not huge growth that we think we're gonna see, or we have been seeing in the last couple of years. One quote from the World Bank Group President Jim Yong Kim said, "If it can be sustained, the robust economic growth that we have seen this year could help lift millions out of poverty, particularly in the fast-growing economies of South Asia. But growth alone won't be enough to address pockets of extreme poverty in other parts of the world. Policymakers need to focus on ways to support growth over the longer run by boosting productivity and labor force participation in order to accelerate progress toward ending poverty and boosting shared prosperity." This quote kind of sums up what I just said. Again, we're seeing some growth on a macro level on some of the top world's economies in the world today. Except that doesn't solve the fact that there are pockets of poverty in these countries and parts of the world. So therefore, just because we're seeing some high level growth, it doesn't mean that it's fixing all of the poverty-stricken areas, and we still need to find ways, as the World Bank Group President Jim Yong Kim stated, to really elevate the life of those people and get a very shared essence of prosperity across the globe. Activity in advanced economies is expected to grow 2.2% in 2018 before easing to a 2% rate of expansion next year, so a slight decline in growth, but still growth. As central banks gradually remove monetary stimulus, it stated in the June 2018 Global Economic Project, growth in emerging market and developing economies overall is projected to strengthen to 4.5% in 2018 before reaching 4.7% in 2019 as the recovery in commodity exported matures and commodity prices level off following this year's increase. So this recent article is basically saying that we're going to see a level off in the increases we're seeing in some of the commodity prices, which can be good. Working in the business that I work in retail, you'll see that a lot of suppliers have stated that the cost of goods has risen slightly because of tariffs and export trade fees and things of that nature. As those start to level off, some of the cost to ship product internationally and also the cost of product should hopefully get back to a moderate level. And that really impacts profitability when you're buying products and selling it to your market, but you rely on international trade to obtain your products. This outlook, though stated above, is subject to considerable downside risks. The possibility of disorderly financial market volatility has increased, and the vulnerability of some emerging market and developing economies to such disruption has risen. Trade protectionist sentiment has also mounted, while policy uncertainty and geopolitical risks remain elevated. So what this basically saying is that we still must be cautious. While we're seeing some global growth in some of our top world economies or some of our top markets and countries, there's still a sense of we don't know exactly what's still going to happen right around the corner. At any point, there could be a shift on a macro and global economic level that all companies and all countries still need to be cautious about. So taking some calculated risks and getting some ease on pricing of global trade is a good thing, but it doesn't mean that all will be kosher, and no country should be just sitting back and thinking that it's going to be an easy ride from here on out. So you need to be cautious, vigilant, have good economic plans for your business, and just keep an eye on the businesses going forward. So that wraps up this week's video lecture. I want to thank you for your time in reviewing the different dynamics of culture and how it impacts global business, and also a brief overview of what world economies are and how world economies are a key topic when it comes to evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of the global business market today. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. I do hope that you find the other videos accompanying this week's lesson enjoyable. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and email me. Keep on top of your assignments. Please check your due dates, making sure you're keeping on track of those. I look forward to your discussions as well. Everybody's doing a good job there. And have a great week, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you so much.